Well, thank you everyone for being here. It occurred to me just a few minutes ago that while the title of this panel is The Changing Federal Workforce, a better title might be The Changing National Workforce and How the Federal Government is Trying to Adapt. So I'd like to start by asking Shannon to kind of frame the challenges agencies face. GAO has done a lot of work in this area, and she can kind of set the stage for what agencies are up against right now.
Sure. Thanks for the introduction. GAO recently issued a report on the future of federal work and workers. And in that report, we looked at what are the key trends affecting the future of federal work. And the reason we did this report was that the Congress was interested in learning about it. You aren't going to be surprised that the government's employment policies were developed, over a generation ago for a type of work and a type of workforce that no longer exists. So there's some fundamental challenges in these areas. In our report, we identify a number of trends that are affecting the future of work. First, not surprisingly, technology. Technology is changing the way we do work, and it's the pace at which that change is occurring is accelerating. Second, changing demographics and shifting attitudes towards work will require new skills to manage an increasingly diverse workforce that has changing expectations for what government agencies need to provide. This workforce is increasingly seeking a sense of purpose, career mobility, and autonomy. And we can get into more details on that later. Another trend we identify is fiscal constraints. So agencies are going to have to do more with less, and so it's going to require skills to be able to reprioritize and rethink what the government does, how it does it, and then also who is doing that work. The fourth trend we identify in the report is an increasing reliance on non-federal partners, such as contractors, grantees, and even citizens through new technologies like open innovation technologies to accomplish the policy goals of the federal government. And then lastly, mission requirements of agencies are constantly evolving. So that requires agencies to change the work and workers to be able to have the skill sets they need to accomplish those policy goals, not only today, but in the future.
Thank you. So Austin, you're in the IT sphere and cyber, interesting, we discussed this earlier. There's a difference between IT and cybersecurity, and you're kind of in both areas in some respects. So you have some unique, you sort of have a unique place in this ecosystem. Tell us about the challenges you face at DHS.
So I'm in a really interesting position because many, we model a lot of societal trends. So you think about like people that are learning from Instagram and they're getting their news from Facebook. Like that's often how we have found we have to be adaptable in order to get our workforce engaged in stuff, like using Slido. Like we have a lot of people that we consider extroverts when they look at your shoes kind of stuff, right? So we have a lot of introverted people that are not comfortable speaking up or don't necessarily have the training to articulate their needs, right? So this is workforce wide. So finding new ways to allow them to get their voices heard has been the real trick that I think we've figured out that works for us. Like we use Slido a lot, Umu a lot to do like online surveys at all hands and those types of things, so that the people that normally would not talk are actually able to anonymously give their opinions. So we have found that for us, one of the things that has just really worked is not relying on the traditional raise your hand and tell us what you're thinking, giving them other ways to present their thoughts.
Lisa, tell us about the challenges at Defense and a little bit about what you're seeing in your area.
So at the risk of summing it into one word, I would say size. Just to put it in context that I find a lot of people don't always know is that the Department of Defense has a budget equivalent to the size of the 20th largest economy in the world. So we have 2.8 million employees. We operate in 160 countries. We have 4,800 sites. And we have been given 66 hiring authorities, which translates into different processes from Congress. So just to give you a little bit of idea of scale and scope, we're trying to do a lot of things, modernize our technology. I'm from the Office of the Chief Management Officer, which is only about a year. We turned a year on February 1st. So it's a new organization that took existing functions with additional functions. I'm in charge of reform. I have our first chief data officer that reports to me. In January 1, I became the CIO for business systems, which may sound small. We have 1,853 of them. And so when you think about some of the challenges, we are competing for talent. We have a lot of focus on reform and changing the way we're doing things and changing it across an organization that has that kind of size, breadth, and a very strong culture. And I actually say that as a positive, can be very challenging. I come from the private sector. I will say that one of the biggest advantages we have at DoD is the strength of our culture and the focus on everyone knows who the customer is and what the mission is. And to have that kind of alignment from the get-go is actually a strength. But we certainly have size, scalability, and competition for talent. We feel those every day.
Thank you. One of the issues you raised, the competition for talent, that's an issue probably for every organization in government. Austin, I thought it was interesting that you talked about needing new ways to communicate with your own workforce to understand their needs, and that's a point that I think many people wouldn't even think about. We spoke earlier about how the competition, particularly in the Washington area, is going to change very rapidly with the opening of Amazon's new headquarters. What kind of, I'll start with you, Austin, what kind of problem do you think that's going to pose for you? And then I'd like to have both Shannon and Lisa comment on what they're seeing, Shannon, at government-wide, if this is a concern broadly, and also Lisa at Defense. Is Defense mission so unique that this is not an issue? But let's start with you, Austin. The current situation with Amazon and the drain it could create.
Sure. So the Amazon ecosystem that's moving in, right? Because it's not just Amazon. It's going to be all of the other like tech companies that are feeding off of Amazon, and they're going to hit us really hard because we do cybersecurity stuff. We also do IT security. So the cybersecurity, just for those of you, because you'll hear that like big sexy word all the time, cybersecurity. That's just really referring to the art form of figuring out what the enemy is trying to do, versus IT security, which is a part of cyber, but it's more securing the actual hardware. So we have to have both. And so with the ecosystem moving in and the constraints that we're feeling right now, we are having to focus on retention. We know this going into it. We need to retain our workforce. We need to give them more incentives pay-wise, but we also need to try to focus on their happiness. So I have a lot of thoughts to say about this, but I'm curious what you guys are thinking as well as I move into this.
Sure. No, I think it's a really important question. And as an auditor, I always look on the bad side of things. But I also see some hope in this area. So the expectations of the future federal workforce, according to the experts that we talked to, there's really individuals are seeking a job that provides purpose in their life. They want to accomplish a mission. And I think this is one area where the federal government has a real competitive advantage against some of the other entities it's competing against. Another area is autonomy. So, and this is another place where we have opportunities and challenges. So, autonomy in terms of how and when you do the work. So, some agencies allow flexibilities like telework or Maxiflex schedules. Those are opportunities we can use to try and recruit people that are looking for that flexibility.
So that's a great point, because one of the things that we have struggled with is we have these ceilings where we have technical folks, like a lot of technical people, and they hit a ceiling in their career. And then they feel like, well, the only way upward is management. And they lack the aptitude for managing people. They don't really care about leadership. They like to do the thing. And so they move into this management role, and this is kind of a systemic thing. And I recognize that, hey, our organization's kind of going through puberty right now, right? But I think we're going through puberty well. So organizational
It's hard to
puberty.
do.
Yeah. So it's hard to manage that, right? So part of it is that as we are going through our puberty and trying to not be very awkward, we're being mindful of trying to allow people to do things if it is not illegal, immoral, or unethical. And that starts with our leadership. We have, as way in the bowels of the organization, we have infused talent development people lower down. We have told our leadership, hey, this is the messaging we really need you to push to these people so they can start to feel a kinship to more of the mission. Not just get a meta view of what's going on, but they can actually feel this mission of defending the critical infrastructures and defending American society, so that when they have a bad day, they still think, man, I feel fulfilled at work. But that starts with our leadership. Our organization takes on their personalities, and luckily, we have had a lot of leadership that has put emphasis on moving people that are not good management to roles that are non-managerial. And that's a nubby thing to do, to try to say, hey, you're really not cutting it as a manager. But it's so critical to take that person and help them not feel like they just completely failed, but help them understand that your skills and abilities align more to a project manager or managing a thing, not managing people. But you have to be mindful, and you have to walk into that nubby discussion and do it.
Well, I'm guessing that requires some creativity sometimes too, in finding roles for people that maximize their strengths.
Yeah.
So Lisa, what is Amazon going to mean for defense? Anything?
Well, certainly, but we welcome actually any private sector, large company in the area. It helps us. I see, we've always been competing for talent, as Shannon talked about, but we do offer some things. While the private sector and large companies may be able to provide pay that we can't compete with, we do have opportunities to attract talent. First and foremost, I get a lot of folks who maybe feel pigeonholed in a role they're in, and they come to us and say, give me a huge, hairy project to work on. We've got them. And as I said, that's the positive thing about scale and this actually feeds into a different view of career development, not necessarily up the ladder, but think about concentric circles and expanding your responsibility, which means you expand your impact. And so that's one of the things that we can offer. We have pension, we have stability, there's a level of honor for serving your country. And one of the things I really like about DoD is how we detail people. We detail people across, whether you're in OSD or you can go to the Army, you can go to the Navy, and you can see a breadth of challenges, opportunities, and how you approach solving them. So I actually think it's great. Large companies attract other folks that want to come in for talent. And just like all of you, probably, and everyone in the private sector, I'm looking for data scientists. The fact that these big companies that have a technology bend and interest are coming in actually can bring more talent into the area. So I see it as a positive.
So I wanted to add on to that. One thing I really like about the DoD, because I was in the Army, and we have tried to mimic some of what you guys have done and also what the NSA does in terms of having warrant officer tracks, right? The DoD does a very good job of saying, you are a commander of people, you're an expert at stuff. But they also get to wear rank that shows that they are the expert on stuff. And they get paid, to compensate for their expertise. So I've seen that a lot of places that I've been don't account for this. But that system really works. It works to have a track that is non-technical, but then to allow for the technical track and to show the growth and to have the prestige, even if it's just a little badge. I know that when I was at the NSA, we had these little badges that if you were a journeyman or if you were a master PCAP person, which is like black magic if you've never seen people do PCAP. It's really crazy looking stuff on a screen. So those types of things, though, they make a huge difference in allowing people to feel fulfillment and want to stay longer.
And just to add on to what you're saying, I think that's really important. It's important to give people pathways to vertical mobility and horizontal mobility. So being able to move up within an organization, and if you're not interested in management or supervisory responsibilities, having a track to proceed up the chain through technical expertise, for example. The number one way I can demotivate my workforce as a manager is to be a bad manager, right? We've all had the bad bosses. The other thing that, Lisa, you hit on is opportunities for horizontal mobility. So opportunities to do details within your own agency, at other agencies, or even to work on task teams or other projects that can really tap into workers' desire to be innovative and have autonomy over the type of work that they're doing.
Yeah, no, I think that we need to let our people be a little different, right? Like we need to be adaptable, and different is oftentimes better than better. Like it's okay if we're the pistachio ice cream of the federal agencies, right? Everyone's got vanilla and there's different levels of great vanilla. We'll be pistachio, and we're okay with that. We embrace it.
So I'd just like to add, to sort of dovetail on what Shannon had said, you talked about strengthening the skills, moving either vertically or horizontally. There's another piece to it that I think helps hone leadership skills. When you're working up a ladder and vertically, you have span of control, right? You can, especially in DoD, you give directives. If you're moving horizontally and you're a detailee, you get to hone your skills on span of influence. And you don't always get the opportunity to be control of everything. So how can you influence change? I'm doing that with reform right now. Reform at the DoD is a huge initiative. It's the third line of effort for our national defense strategy. And so we have to rely on people who understand span of control but can affect change through span of influence. And I think that's what that vertical and horizontal also lends itself to creating.
So I want to talk for a minute about the hiring challenge. It takes notoriously long to get a job in the federal government. That certainly is a competitive disadvantage. In an earlier conversation with Lisa, she mentioned that she has 60 different hiring authorities, which are designed to give her flexibility, yet she's actually requesting fewer authorities. And that's, I'd like to talk a little bit about that, sort of the mechanism for hiring. Is there a way to streamline that and make that better, and is there any hope there? So Lisa, do you want to start by describing?
Huge hope, absolutely. So this is every time I talk to somebody, a member of Congress, they're wonderful, they've been supportive, they say, how do I help? Do you need another hiring authority? I said, no, I'm good. 66 of them. And if you're not familiar with that each of them has a nuance to them, right? And different opportunities and authorities and so forth. And so when you're hiring someone, you have to think about which one do I tap into? So we actually just put forward a legislative proposal to ask that we take about 40 of them and condense them into one. Because good intent, but inadvertently it created a bit of a sub-bureaucracy. And that lends itself to making a bit of a cumbersome hiring process. So time to hire is actually one of our reform initiatives. And what I found very interesting is we didn't have necessarily the right metrics or good metrics around time to hire. We always measured it as somebody who's at the job, at their desk, right? But I found so I had an internal customer that said, what is going on with my hiring? It's taking forever. And I looked at it and I said, well, this individual that you want to hire was available to onboard on November 26th. You chose to give them 39 days to make their decision and then decided to wait 46 more days to actually onboard them. Why is that against my time to hire? So it's actually created a great opportunity where within our organization, the hiring organization and the folks that are processing it now share metrics. And now you get people around the same metrics. Now you're focused on the same goal. So there's a tremendous amount of hope. We also have, that's kind of unique in DoD, we have 6 organizations that do hiring, and everyone's reaction is get rid of several of them. I don't need to do that. I have a lot of cohorts. We hire we have appointees, we have civilians, we have all kinds of folks that we hire. What if one organization only hired the GS folks while another one handled SESs and appointees? Now I've got centers of excellence all rallied around a similar end-to-end process. And that's where we're moving toward, and we're already seeing really positive results.
So two things that's making me think of that we kind of do that I'm starting to think are more successful, hopefully, than I'm realizing. We're trying to actually hire more people in at the secret level because historically we're all top secret, but we're finding that a lot of our workforce doesn't actually do top secret work. And so we're cutting down on the hiring process because there's this self-inflicting wound of suitability and other things. We can't fix that. We can't change that. We're pushing against it. So bringing people in at public trust or bringing them in at a secret level clearance to do certain types of work has been working for us. But then also we have been knowing that it is hard on hiring managers to constantly be contacting their prospective people to email them because they have things to run. So we've been trying to use the concepts of micro-training. I don't know if you guys are familiar with this idea of micro-training, right? It's like when you look at YouTube and you see like a 3 to 9 minute video about a thing, right? Like that's what your training needs to be. So we've been actually making micro-trainings, little films, little things like that, and we are allowing some of our people in the pipeline to have access to those things so they can stay warmer, so they can actually start to see our culture before they're showing up. So it's not just they got an email and then they're waiting for a year and a half and they don't hear anything. So we're trying to incorporate that a little bit up front so that the candidates will actually stay in the pipeline longer because we lose so many people.
I think it's also important to think about active recruitment strategies. So not only, targeting colleges at career fairs, but actually developing relationships with colleges to identify the places where the talent is at, and then also to ensure that you're creating a pipeline of talent that's diverse in thought and abilities as well.
We're going to open it up for questions soon, but I want to get one last question in here. The 35-day partial government shutdown, what kind of impact did that have on the on the two of you, and then Shannon, did you see? So Austin, you want to start with that?
I'll start. So, it's funny because when my wife didn't get affected by it because she's in the Air Force, and many of my coworkers were not affected. They still had to go into work. So they're calling me and they're like, oh, you're so lucky you get to sit home and do this. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm going to be so productive. I'm going to write this book and I'm going to do this. I'm going to exercise. And I played Zelda for weeks. And I found that as I started to get these calls by all these people, it seemed collectively our morale took a huge hit. People started feeling like, am I really necessary? I thought that they needed me, but obviously they don't. And so there's a lot of just hard feelings that went into that. And I don't think we've actually recovered from it, to be honest. I helped multiple people find new positions internally, just as a friend and as they had it, they need the stability, whatever their reason is. But it really affected us. And I'm grateful that we didn't have that second one, because I think we would have lost 10% of our workforce if we had that second one.
That's significant. So obviously DoD wasn't directly affected, but it's the same ecosystem in a way.
It is, but we did not feel the impact as in the same way that Austin did. We did not shut down, so you're right. All of us were there, which got a little frustrating because everybody kept calling me and saying, "Oh, that's cool, you're up." No, I'm at work. Yeah. So thank you for that. So we didn't feel as big of the impact.
Did you feel any impact in being able to work with other agencies that may have been shut down?
Yes, that's where, from a personnel standpoint, we didn't, but trying to make sure that things were staying on pace and schedule with some of the agencies that were closed down, yes. I will say, though, that they did an absolute amazing job when they were back to work, putting in the overtime to clean out the backlog. So there was a great sense of partnership, which I appreciated.
Yeah. Shannon, do you have a sense of the impact the shutdown had in workforce government-wide?
Sure. So two thoughts. One thing is when we spoke with experts about what the workforce is looking for, one thing that they noted was the government had this tradition of being a stable employer, and that was a recruiting advantage. And I think anytime we have government shutdowns, that puts that into question, right? The other thing too is, it is a challenge, but it doesn't necessarily, it's not overcomable. And I'm thinking we weren't affected by this most recent shutdown, but a shutdown or two ago, it's hard to keep track at this point. I came back after being out of the office for a while, was really demoralized and trying to think, okay, I have so much to do. I don't know if this is really what I want to do. There was a knock on my door, and I turned around, and it was the Comptroller General, the head of our agency. And he said, I know this past week has been rough, or a few weeks has been rough. What you're doing is important. Keep it up. And that one interaction totally changed my mindset. So a lot of it, if you have strong leadership and tone from the top, you can overcome some of these challenges and help continue to engage your workforce. But it's hard.
Yeah, that's a really good point and a good example. So questions from the audience?
Hello, my name is Cornelius Berkeley. I'm from the Department of Transportation. I really love the conversation around autonomy. And I think like for the government and trying to win the millennials, I think it's important. So when we think about autonomy, we think about kind of working off on your own project and kind of doing something you enjoy. I think another concept that I think will be helpful, especially for this new generation, is time. So what we do is we measure time and productivity, and we kind of mash them together. We think working 80 hours a week actually equals productivity. And this generation really is like doing things faster. And I think if we're really measuring productivity, we shouldn't equate it to 80 hours. There's some companies that, if you do this work that's agreed upon, you can go. I think that's really where, as a government, we should be thinking about going. I think that will also help, the attractiveness, because these young people, they have other interests. They want to go travel, they want to go explore, they want to do other things, so.
I think that's an interesting point, how we measure productivity, because everyone knows, we've all, we know people who work 80 hours a week and really aren't very productive, and then there are other people who do an amazing amount. It's hard for metrics to capture that sometimes. So how can government
I think
respond to that?
culture plays a big part in it. I know that like my wife is Air Force, like long-term special agent, right? So her culture is very structured, and that really works for her, and the hierarchy works for her. Our culture, where I'm at, is very unstructured. So we want people to take the bull by the horns, to wrestle with stuff, and our culture is all about adaptability. So I think one of the things that to your point, sir, is that there are going to be different cultural values that if you can hire for those, if you can teach those things, like we screen for adaptability. We want people that are adaptable. We want people that enter, try something, fail, refine, try, fail, and they get it done in the same amount of time that it took someone else to plan something. So I think this the cultural, like being mindful of just letting the different agencies have their cultures and even subcultures is important.
So I agree. One thing I want to make sure, though, what hierarchy doesn't necessarily mean we lack the ability to innovate.
Sure,
And actually, shout out to the Air Force. They're a great leader in terms of experimentation. And despite the strength of the culture, don't think that strength means rigidity, that we're actually starting to change the culture in a positive way, where we're looking at more agile approaches, iterative designs, learning, inspecting, et cetera. But I do appreciate the question, because it speaks to, as I talked earlier about the shared metrics, we're focusing on outcomes. And what that has to translate to is not only how we measure the success of an initiative, but it has to also align with performance evaluations. And so with that lack of alignment, then creates an issue for the employee because they don't know, am I focused on my performance metrics or am I focused on the metrics for a successful completion of a project? And sometimes they're in conflict with one another. So those are some of the shifts that we're actually doing starting with our reform, but then as we put it throughout the rest of DoD, we're seeing some positive change to that very point. So I appreciate you bringing that up.
Do we have any other questions?
So I'm really enjoying this panel discussion. My name is Kiana Oxendine. I posed a question earlier, but I'd be interested in you guys' response. So as we're evolving in human resources, how are we implementing or are we moving towards an integration with insider threat on the cybersecurity side with human resources? Because I know that's a real pressing issue. Just curious in your thoughts.
So with human resources, I think things are needing to be more tiered than centralized, right? So that's one of the things we've recognized is this idea that at the very top of the organization, that's where our human resources in, that's where insider threat is, like that's where the decisions are being made, doesn't work. Like you can even sometimes maybe have centralized but embed your personnel, and that works. But it really needs to have a tiered approach. You need to have people at multiple levels of the organization that are all feeding upward, and to include the insider threat, because the best way to conduct insider threat is to make everybody an informant, if you can, you know? So everyone needs to be trained on phishing. Everyone needs to be trained on what am I actually looking for that looks suspicious. And that can be coordinated through the HR, but if you don't actually make a tiered approach to it, it doesn't really work. It hits ceilings multiple levels down and just kind of fizzles out. Does that answer your question? Okay. I don't know.
Other questions?
Hi, I work for one of the military branches, and I know we're all talking here about bringing younger workforce because our older workforce eventually will be, cycling out. But some of the things that we're seeing is that in military branches, when we talk culture and things such as that, there's a history of taking civilian billets and converting them to uniform positions. That eliminates opportunity both internally and externally for our lower levels going up. People also see somebody in uniform on a Friday come back as a civilian on Monday in the same job that they've never seen advertised. So there's an opportunity gone. And I realize there are some particular specialties, that might be very, very intricate or something that person who's already in it as a uniform may be the best candidate for that, and those are some of the exceptions. But we've tried to hire some people at a 14 position and been turned down to the point where we had to re-advertise. So that's saying something there, because I think they look around and they see, half of these things are taken up by a different workforce, a different type of workforce, where people are just going to constantly come in and out of those positions, and those are not going to be open. And maybe expansion also goes to military billets and not to the civilian billets. So that's another thing with a younger workforce coming in, is that they come in and maybe if they've had 5 years, they're like, well, that's really not enough time to be vested, so I'm going to go elsewhere and make twice as much money for what it is that I want to do. So how can we overcome these mindsets where maybe it seems easier for senior leadership in uniform to fill it with other uniforms? I don't know why, for various reasons. Or, what can we do more to see that civilians coming into a military organization do have the potential to advance and move along and can stay another 20, 25 years? Because they see military people who've done 20 years, like I said, leave on Friday, come back on Monday to stay another 15 or 20 years before they go into complete retirement.
I guess the short answer would be that bringing an awareness to this as a problem and the impact it's having, because I've not heard of this before, and I've not heard anyone, at least within the building, talk about this. So I think that's a great start where I can message back, hey, we've got a situation going on, and understanding the impact gives us an opportunity to address it.
Okay, we're out of time, but I want to thank our panel. This has been a really informative discussion, and thank you all for coming as well.
Thank you.